Across many parts of the world, especially in India and the West, there's a common belief: if China can do it, we can too. In India, this sentiment runs especially deep. Many argue that India has already outpaced China in areas like film, pharmaceuticals, IT, and population. Figures show that Bollywood produces more films than any other country. Indian IT firms handle over half of the world's outsourcing. India produces more than 20% of the world's generic drugs, and its population has surpassed China's by a wide margin. But behind these claims of surpassing China lies a deeper reality. Recently, a dataset claiming that India has overtaken China as the largest source of smartphone imports to the US made big headlines across the globe. The second quarter of 2025, smartphones imported from India accounted for 44% of the US total, while China's share dramatically dropped from 61% last year to just 25%. This marks the first time India has surpassed China in this category. News outlets like CNN and Bloomberg covered the shift. Some Indian media even celebrated it as a sign that India is replacing China as the world's manufacturing hub. On social media, the story of India overtaking China quickly gained momentum, with many believing India had made a huge leap in the smartphone sector. But a closer look at a report from the US market research firm reveals a crucial detail: the vast majority of that 44% share comes from Apple. In other words, India's so-called rise to the top of US smartphone exports is almost entirely driven by a single brand. The much-hyped narrative of India overtaking China was steeped in clickbait from the very beginning. The so-called myth of India overtaking China doesn't hold up to scrutiny. What India has gained is primarily the final stage of smartphone assembly, while China continues to control the beating heart of the global supply chain. According to Canalys, in the second quarter of 2025, 97% of iPhones exported from Foxconn's Indian factory were bound for the US, with Apple clearly leading the charge. While the assembly takes place in India, nearly all core components still come from China. The Economic Times of India revealed that, for Indian assembled iPhones, high-value parts such as Qualcomm chips, BOE displays, Sony optical camera modules, and cattle batteries have a localization rate of less than 5%. Even accessories like packaging boxes and charging cables are truly made in India, with 60% still manufactured in factories across China's Pearl River Delta. Put simply, Indian factories are handling the final assembly, piecing together components shipped from China and branding them as made in India. China, by contrast, is building the heart of the smartphone. From chip design and precision manufacturing to operating system optimization and supply chain management, it controls the most technologically sophisticated and profit-rich segments of the production process. Take a simple example. For a $1,000 iPhone, the profit from India's assembly work is less than $5. Meanwhile, Chinese companies earn more than $300 just by supplying key components like the display and the chipset. This assembly-only model makes the narrative of India overtaking China look more like wishful thinking than reality. It's like building a house. India might be laying the final floor tiles, but the steel, cement, and blueprints all come from China. The real center of gravity in the supply chain is hard to miss. Even in assembly alone, India's performance is far from impressive. High production cost and low efficiency make this supposed overtaking look more like a hollow show of face saving than a true industrial breakthrough. The first major issue is the inability to reduce costs. According to multiple media outlets citing Apple's supply chain data, the cost of assembling an iPhone in India is 5-8% higher than at Foxconn's plants in China. Why is this the case? The answer lies in infrastructure. Indian factories frequently face power outages, forcing them to install their own diesel generators, which increases electricity costs by 15% compared to China. Logistical efficiency is also much lower. Transporting components from ports to inland factories takes 3 times as long, and the loss rate is as high as 8%. In contrast, China's loss rate is only around 1.2%. A more troublesome issue is the shortage of skilled workers. India claims to have 5.4 million IT professionals, but in reality, most are entry-level programmers, and there exists an equal gap in the manufacturing workforce. Skilled workers make up just 7% of India's electronics manufacturing workforce, while the figure in China is 35%. Apple's India plant once struggled with unskilled workers, leading to a 20% lower camera assembly quality compared to China. Rework rates soared, which in turn slowed down production. These bottlenecks won't be resolved in the short term. Although the Indian government has been pushing a manufacturing revival plan for years, challenges like weak basic education, incomplete industrial infrastructure, and inconsistent policies have made foreign companies reluctant to shift core production capacity there. As one industry analyst put it, India is like a child who's just learned how to build with blocks, but is still far from being able to construct a skyscraper. India has barely managed to claim the top spot in exports through iPhone assembly, but this could be shattered by the US tariff hammer. President Trump has recently been firing frequent shots at India. First, he openly criticized Apple CEO Tim Cook, saying, "I don't want iPhones made in India, they should be made in the US." Then, he issued a stark warning: if India fails to meet US trade demands, a 25% tariff will be imposed on Indian goods exported to the US. According to the US Department of Commerce, India currently benefits from tariff exemptions on smartphone exports to the US. However, with revoked exemptions and new tariffs, the cost of exporting Indian-made iPhones to the US will rise by 15–20%. This puts Apple in a real bind. If the tariff is imposed, the price of Indian-made iPhones will soar in the US market, and consequently, Apple would either lose market share or see its profits shrink. But moving manufacturing back to the US is a far less viable option, given that US labor costs are 8 times those in India. An even more troublesome issue is that Trump also raised the geopolitical threats. He emphasized that the energy and arms trade between India and Russia is having a detrimental effect on the US, and the politicalization of trade issues makes India's export environment increasingly precarious. A representative from India's Chamber of Commerce lamented helplessly, "It could all come down to just one word from the US that causes us to lose the deals we work so hard for." In the end, India's overtaking China fanfare is like a performance on shifting sand, appearing dazzling on the surface, but the risk at collapsing beneath.